in a second and I'll go real quick. Good morning. It's Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. And after a long and anticipated, our guests for today, our witnesses for today, will update us on, I guess, where it starts with the EV registration money that the agency is collecting and eventually headed over to charging activity and what we're up to with our electric vehicle supply equipment. So I don't know if you want to introduce everybody or take questions along the way or how you plan on handling it, but the next hour as needed is all yours to update the committee. And welcome this morning to the full house. It's rare for us. So please take it away.
I think I'm going to pass it to my boss first to do a brief introduction, and then I'll take over with the program.
Good morning, and thank you for getting us on your schedule. We apologize for having to cancel. There's just been sickness and health is important, so we decided to not get you sick. I hope you appreciate that. My name is Chris Cochran. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Revitalization, and I work in the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Probably your question is, why does the Agency of Commerce and Community Development run the EV charging station program in the state? And the history goes back about 10 to 15 years. And there was initially some money to do EV charging stations. And the impulse at the time was like, oh, let's just put them in a gas station. Let's just put them at a restaurant. I'm like, no, it doesn't really make sense. We should look for opportunities because people are captive. They've got to charge their car for an hour. Where can we locate this infrastructure in our communities so people charge and shop and do other things, go for a hike, however, there's other opportunities and synergies. So we've been running this program for about, I think it's going to say 10 or 15 years. It's gone through a bunch of different iterations, and here we're kind of in the most mature phase of it. And Brahman is here to tell you more about this. One thing that we can't talk about is I don't have any great visibility on the nature of. Last year there was a EV fee that was created to support the program, and I don't know if someone from VTrans can actually speak on kind of where that stands. But I want to say it generates around $800,000. To support the build out of EV infrastructure in the state. So the program that ACCD runs. I'm going to stop there. And do you guys want us to do introductions? I think you know probably all the VTrans folks, but to my.
Hi all, I'm Natalie Alvage. I'm on the team with Chris and Bronwyn. I am a planning coordinator with the team, and I'm assisting with some aspects of the administration of the electric vehicle supply equipment.
And we administer the program in partnership with Green Mountain Power. They seem to know a few things about building infrastructure, so they're great. Yeah. So
I'm Maddie Marie Clausen. I'm a project manager at Green Mountain Power, helping administer the Charge Vermont program in coordination with Bronwyn and Natalie. And I'm Candace Morgan from Green Mountain Power and Government and Regulatory Affairs.
Welcome. Thank you.
Great. I will share my screen. For the record, my name is Bronwyn Cook. I'm the person that of this whole team that supports this program. I pull the short straw and get to present to you all on the program itself, but they're all here to help answer questions that I might not be able to answer myself. So I have a brief presentation for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the background that Chris talked about, how our agency has been involved in EVSE charging, the coordination that we have with VTrans to help build out the EVSE network. I'll talk a little bit about some of the past grant programs that we've run, some of our work to try and evaluate and assess those programs, which Natalie has been really instrumental in getting that work done. And then the bulk of what I'll talk about is this Charge Vermont program that we are administering in partnership with Green Mountain Power. And happy to take questions along the way, clarifying questions along the way would be great. And then, I think we'll have plenty of time afterwards to chat and discuss. All right, so as Chris mentioned, I work in the Community Planning and Revitalization Division, which is in the Department of Housing and Community Development. We have spent a lot of time figuring out what exactly it is we do. Our mission statement is up here on the slide for you. I'm not going to read it off. Chris also mentioned, why is CP&R involved in doing EV charging? And as he mentioned, In the early days of EV charging investment, it was really seen as an opportunity for local economic development, putting it in places in our downtowns and our villages where there's things for people to do while they are charging. Seems like a really great fit for this kind of infrastructure. Our division runs the downtown, the designation program. So we had a lot of, we do a lot of work in communities and do a lot of work with downtown organizations, et cetera. So we had a lot of contacts to be able to run a program like this in those places where people will have amenities while they're charging. There's also, we've continued to work in the EVSC space. There's a lot of ties to community planning, zoning and bylaws. There's a lot of ties to housing, as you'll see in some of the programs that we've developed. So we've continued to work in this space and build expertise in the EVSC infrastructure space. Some of the slides that I'm going to present, I believe you've seen before. I think VTrans has presented similar slides, but I just want to kind of set the table and get us all on the same page. So I won't try and belabor these points, but I do just want to go over them really quickly. So this slide gives us some indication of, I think of it as like the qualitative aspects of what the EV charging network needs to look like. What different speeds or levels of charge need to be out there, and what are the different locations in which those different charging speeds can exist. Our programs that ACCD has operated have touched on those bottom three tiers: the yellow, the dark blue, and the green. So charging in public locations, entertainment, shopping, downtown areas, et cetera, workplace, and in the residential space, we've focused primarily on the multi-unit property residential charging. VTrans, for the most part, their programs operate at that very top level in those heavily traveled corridors along highways, although we do overlap in that yellow space in the places where it just so happens that our downtowns or places with a lot of amenities happen to be close to a travel corridor. And so we coordinate pretty closely with VTrans on some of our infrastructure projects and are kind of able to leverage some of the funds that we have to kind of hit both of our marks. The tougher part of the EVSC network to describe, so that looks at the qualitative, the different speeds and the different locations, but the tougher part is what's the quantitative aspect? How many chargers do we need of each level in each location? And to be honest, that's just a really tough question to answer. But we do have a couple of things that we use to kind of get a sense of, what might the EV charging network need to look like roughly. So again, I think VTrans presented similar information. We are able to look at the state's goal. The state has a goal to have 126,000 electric vehicles registered in the state by 2030. Using that target number, the DOE has this really kind of fun tool to help estimate if that is your target for how many EVs you want on the road. This is what your charging network will need to look like. And so I know VTrans focused quite a bit on this number for DC fast charging. And so in their presentation, the investments that ACCD has made in DC fast charging were in that presentation from VTrans. I think the point that I want to reiterate here is that DC fast charge is just one part of the whole network. And the tool allows you to make some assumptions. So one of the assumptions is, well, how many people have access to home charging? The sort of general assumption is that most charging will happen at home. It's supposed to be the most convenient, reliable, affordable place for most people to charge their vehicles. And so 80% of charging is expected to happen at home. And so the more we invest and can build out access to charging at home, the less that we need to rely on DC fast charging public. And so there's a lot of benefits in that in terms of efficiency of investment. DC fast charging is pretty expensive, and not only expensive in terms of the infrastructure itself and the installation, but it's likely to be a more costly way to charge because of that large upfront capital investment. So the more investing in residential charging we make, the less investing we need to make in that DC fast charging network.
Representative Pike?
Yeah, sort of on that same, getting charging at home. which would be at night. We have Green Mountain Power here. I mean, there's also the advantage of charging off peak. I don't know if you're going to talk about that at all, or the cost advantage of that.
I wasn't going to get into a lot of the other network benefits of distributing our network and having lower level charging and off-peak hours, but certainly, I mean, yeah, I think GMP would agree that that's certainly part of the idea of having a network that's not entirely reliant on DC fast charge. I don't know if you want to say anything else to that.
Yeah, we currently have two EV charging rates. One is a dynamic time of use rate, and a fixed time of use rate to help incentivize adoption of electric vehicles and EV charging at home. We also provide a free level 2 charger when folks get an all electric vehicle. And certainly those off-peak hours are overnight right now. And we have, many of our customers who get EVs, so get a charger for us too.
Would you define the off-peak rate as an incentive, or is there an advantage to Green Mountain Power overall cost to have the consumption, in the evening?
Yeah, it's both. And we recently published our next, or it's a draft of our next integrated resources plan, where we're looking out over the next 10, 20, 30 years with EV load growth specifically, and how we'll want to help support the grid with managed EV charging. So yeah, it's both incentive to the customer and to support the grid.
Thank you.
So just a little bit more on this tool, so certainly the DC fast charge is an important part of the network, but I actually think the tool tells us something a little bit more interesting than just about the DC fast charge. It's not a perfect tool, it's just an estimate. It doesn't necessarily tell us how we fund and make this happen, right? So if there's a part of this network that says, it's public charging in a downtown, it doesn't necessarily mean that that needs to be publicly funded. There's a part of this network that's going to be private. It's going to be at workplaces and residents. And when it's private, that doesn't necessarily mean that the private market is going to move in that space without some public investment. So it's an imperfect tool. But one of the things I wanted to point out that I do think is interesting is that the tool does tell us something about what we should be aiming for in terms of equity. So in theory, we could meet our goal of 126,000 EVs on the road and not have any charging and multi-unit properties. But that would mean that if residents of multi-unit properties wanted to be part of that 126,000, if they wanted to adopt an EV, then they would have to rely entirely on public charging, which tends to be more expensive, and they wouldn't have the benefit of that being able to charge meet most of their needs at home. So the DOE tool is essentially saying, we want to see a network that is built so that the whole system can be equitable. And that reinforces, I think, what our program is trying to do, which is trying to build out that network so that all Vermonters can consider switching to an EV if that is what they want to do. They have access to charging at home. Okay. Moving on from the model. It's a fun tool. If you have a few minutes, you should go and play around in it and play with the assumptions. It's pretty interesting to see.
Roman's idea of fun is not everybody else.
Fair point. So I'm going to do a quick background of some of the programs that we have run in the past, and then again spend the bulk of my time on the current program that we're running with Green Mountain Power, Charge Vermont. But as Chris mentioned, we started working in the EVSE space back in 2014. It started with settlement funds from the Volkswagen emissions scandal. So we got some funds from that, went to Agency of Natural Resources. We entered into an MOU with Agency of Natural Resources to invest that money into EVSE infrastructure in public spaces. So we ran 5 different rounds of grant funds. The first 3 rounds were very much focused on individual property owners. Most of those were municipalities that were wanting to provide charging in the public realm within their communities. We learned a lot from that. The majority of that infrastructure was level 2 equipment. And this was early days of EVSE. Majority of that equipment was level 2. There was some equipment that was DC fast charge. And I think I wasn't around at the time, but my understanding is we learned in that process that DC fast charge is is a much bigger beast and a lot for a municipality to take on in terms of managing a project, selecting the equipment, getting it implemented, and then owning and operating it after the fact. So in our second 2 rounds of funds, we kind of switched gears, and those second 2 rounds of grant opportunities were targeted at service providers. So there's companies who own and operate level 3 equipment out there. So we decided to target our grant opportunities to service providers who were responsible for finding a site host, a property owner who wanted to have DC fast charging on their property. And then the service provider was responsible for installing the equipment and then owning and operating it for a set amount of time. So most of those locations are closed out. We do have a couple of locations that are still working on getting implemented. In 2022, we expanded our EVSE grant programming into that residential space. So recognizing that, again, the network is not just about DC fast charging, it's also about home charging access, and recognizing that charging access at multi-unit was just a particularly challenging space. It's there's shared parking, it's not dedicated parking. A property owner doesn't, with a 1% vacancy rate, there's not necessarily a huge need to provide a lot of amenities to attract tenants. So there's just a split incentive there with EV charging. We wanted to try and identify what are the types of technological and business model solutions that would work for a property owner of a multi-unit property and for the tenants, so that the tenants would have access to EVSE charging. The program, it was $1 million. It was focused on affordable multi-unit properties. It was oversubscribed in terms of applications. The program wasn't about volume, though. I mean, I think we knew with $1 million, we're not really going to make a huge dent in the terms of the number of multi-unit properties that then have charging. But again, it was really trying to identify what are the market solutions that are lacking, and what do we need to provide to help make this an easier solution and an easier thing for property owners to provide to tenants. Before I move on to the Charge Vermont, I just want to make a quick note that we, through our grant programs, and again, with the help of Natalie, now that she's on our team, we've been able to spend a little bit more time looking back and doing some program evaluation, some program assessment. We've done interviews with all of our affordable multi-unit grant recipients. Those interviews were really insightful, just getting that information about how did this go for you? What were your challenges? What were the sticking points? What were the benefits? And we've been able to use all that information to then inform our ongoing programs. We're also able to assess some of the project costs. They're still pretty all over the board. It really depends on the specific site, what the electricity capacity already is, how long the trenching is, where the parking is. I mean, costs are still kind of a pretty wide range, but we've been able at least to get some insights on the hardware itself versus the software versus the site preparation work that's needed, et cetera. For those of us who are data nerds like myself, one of the things we're really excited about is most of our grantees were required to report to us the use data from their stations if they were network stations. It's, a lot of our recipients were small municipalities. And so we realized that our compliance for that reporting wasn't great. So Natalie mostly, worked pretty hard to set up a new process so that it made it easier for those equipment owners to just submit a very simple report to us. So now we have a whole load of raw data from those stations. And we weren't requiring that the municipalities, analyze the data or sort the data or anything like that. Just give us the raw data, give us the report. And through VTrans's contract with Drive Electric Vermont, we've been able to draft a scope of work where we're going to give that data to Drive Electric Vermont, and Drive Electric Vermont will come up with some nice summary analysis for us to give us a sense of how are these stations being used over time? How long does it take before a station starts to see increased use? Are there particular times of the day that they're used more than others, et cetera? So I'm pretty excited about that data analysis task. For those of us who are a little less data oriented and like good stories, the other thing that we've done is created some case studies. So on your handouts, there are some case studies from some of our past grantees. 3 of those case studies are from the multi-unit grant program that we ran. And they're just great stories. They all have a little bit of a different kind of angle and benefit that the property owners saw in doing EVSE. So highly recommend that you give those a read. All right, so moving on to our current program, Charge Vermont. So in the 2021-2022 legislative session, Act 185 was passed. That appropriated $10 million to essentially build out the agency's EVSE programs in these 4 program areas, A, B, C, and D. The Charge Vermont program is a $7 million program, and it's covering 3 of those program areas. It's covering level 1 and level 2 EVSE equipment at multi-dwelling units, level 1 and level 2 at workplaces, and level 1, 2, and 3 at public attractions. The 4th program, which is for charging that is available to the public at state workplaces. That was an obvious, we just need to contract with BGS. They know what they're doing. They do an EVSE program already. We entered into an MOU with BGS for $500,000. So those are the 2 big areas of program funding we have right now to cover those 4 programmatic areas. Just really quick on BGS, I think if you want more information, I would recommend inviting Brian Sewell in. He's great. Our take on the BGS MOU is, BGS does this already. They already own equipment. They've installed and operated equipment. And so we, through an interagency working group that VTrans sits on, as well as Department of Public Service, ANR, ourselves, we drafted a scope of work with BGS. It gives them a lot of flexibility to say, you decide which sites are most suitable or most cost effective. But as long as we get at least 8 locations out of this 500,000 and you report back to us, we're good. I think that project has been hung up in contracting. BGS had one contractor on a state contract that could do EVSE work, and they wanted to expand that. So they were going through a process to get a couple more contractors on that list. And they're, I think, almost done with that. And once they have a few more contractors on that list, then they'll put this project out for bid. Okay, so on to the bulk of the fun stuff. So the rest of these slides are about that Charge Vermont program that we're administering in partnership with GMP. So a high level sort of timeline of how the program evolved. In March of 2023, we selected Green Mountain Power through a competitive process. As Chris mentioned, they know what they're doing. They work in this field. They have a lot of contacts to contractors, et cetera, a lot of deep technical expertise in this. So made sense to partner with them. In July of 2023, and I will say that not only were they tasked with administering the program, but they were also tasked with helping us develop the program. This was a pretty big expansion going from 1 million to 10 million. And so they were really instrumental in helping us work through the design of how to administer and roll this program out. So once we were finished with the design, we launched in July of 2023. We started with essentially a rolling application process, a rolling program for level 1 and 2 incentives for multi-unit, workplace, and community attractions. So that was the bulk of the funds. And it was essentially like a first come, first serve. The bar for entry was very low. We had a pre-application, and it was basically just, are you interested in doing EVSE? Give us your name, give us your location. If you have an idea for what kind of electric vehicle infrastructure you want, let us know. But it was a very simple low bar. From there, it required a lot of admin work to reach back out to people and just make sure that they're actually eligible for the program, et cetera. That's the program that we're still working through right now. We still have some funds left. I'll give you some more details on that in a minute. In July of 2024, we knew that we wanted some of the public attraction funds to help fill some gaps in the DC fast charge network. So if you look at a map of Vermont and look at where DC fast charging is, there's a lot of areas where it is not. And so we wanted to be able to use these funds to try and fill some of those gaps and get access to DC fast charging in parts of Vermont that were further than 10 miles. So we didn't have a whole lot of the DC fast charging money doesn't go very far. We had 1.4 million. So we couldn't do that as a rolling program. We did that as a competitive grant program. Not only because it's not a lot of money, but again, those projects are a lot more complicated and we wanted to be able to vet to make sure applicants were really ready to move forward with a larger project like a DC fast charge. So those competitive grants were awarded in July of 2024. And I have one more slide on that at the very end with a couple of details, but high level timeline of how that program has rolled out. The next few slides are some more details on that rolling program, the level 1, level 2 rolling application. So we had originally estimated that the program would be able to finish or complete about 150 projects. So we had 4.6 million set aside just for level 1 and level 2 in multi-unit workplaces and public attractions. We roughly estimated 150 projects. That was based on the incentive amounts that were available depending on the size of the property, how many residential units, how many employees, et cetera. Now that we're 2 years in and we've actually completed a bunch of projects, we're able to update those estimates. We're now estimating we'd probably be able to do closer to 200 projects and roughly 800 ports. The incentive amounts that are being requested is lower than we anticipated, and some of the projects are smaller than we anticipated. So we're able to get more projects out of the dollars that we have. This just goes into a little bit more, dives into a little bit more detail. So of that roughly 4.8 million, 2.7 million was allocated just for multi-unit. That was part of statute. We had to spend at least 30% of the funds on multi-unit property investments. We had 1.8 million for workplace and 360,000 for level 2 public attraction. And again, the other big part of the funding was for the DC fast charge public attraction, but it was not part of the rolling applications. It was a separate competitive grant program. We also put in place a county cap. Just, this is scaling up to 10 million was pretty big. When we did the multi-unit pilot, we knew that there was interest across the state, but we didn't know what it was going to look like rolling up to a $10 million program on a rolling basis. So we put in a county cap just to make sure that we would end up with some geographic dispersion in the program. So the cap was set 10%. No county could receive more than 10% of the total funds. And then we also had utility territory caps just to make sure that the funds were distributed across different utility territories as well. This is a screenshot from the program's website that just lets people know at the moment, we are fully subscribed in workplace. We have enough projects that are in construction or completed or in process that we're fully subscribed with our workplace funding, and same for the public attractions level 2. We do still have multi-unit program funding available, but only in a few counties, because some of the counties, Chittenden, Washington, and Windham, and sorry, I can't read this from afar. You can see it's easier to see it there. Some of the counties have reached that 10% cap. They have $486,000 in projects, and so they're essentially not eligible for any other funding at the moment. This is showing similar information, but it just breaks it down so that you can see sort of how our projects are flowing through the program. So again, on the far left, the total program funds, you can see how much we have for each program. The contracted column, those are the number of projects that They have submitted a design estimate plan to GMP. GMP has approved it and said, here is the incentive you're available for. They have signed a contract. So they are in contract and they are in construction right now, or they're complete. So these are all projects that are either being implemented right now or they're complete. The pipeline, these are projects that have been screened by GMP. They are eligible for an incentive. They've been told, go out, get your design estimate. Once you give that back to us, we'll get into the contracting phase. And most of the projects, once they're in this design estimate phase, they do move forward. So we are still holding funds for these projects, assuming that they are going to move forward. And so between these two columns, that's how we come up with our total, and that's how we come up with the determination that these program funds are obligated, we're oversubscribed. It's possible that some projects will drop out of the pipeline, but we haven't been seeing a whole lot of that once they are in the design and estimate phase. Again, the average incentive amount is coming in a little bit lower at the moment with our 59 projects that we have in contract. If that trend continues, we'll be able to do more projects than what we have in the pipeline right now. And we'll go out to communities and say, hey, bring us some more projects. But they will still have to be projects that are in multi-unit, no workplace, no public attraction, and they will have to be in counties that have not met that cap. So do have some more funding. We may be able to get some more projects in, but they're going to be limited to multi-unit and counties that haven't met the cap.
What can we actually find? Can we go to your website and find where these projects are in our communities?
We don't have a list yet of we don't have an itemized list of each applicant and where they are in the process. I think
The ones that have been funded, you said fully subscribed, like in Benny, like. Have they been installed, not installed? And if they've been installed, can I find out where those are?
I think once projects are fully installed, we'll update our website and have a list of once they're fully installed. I think I would be hesitant to put the ones that are sort of in pipeline in progress because it's like a 500 long spreadsheet of.
All right, so maybe I'm misreading. So they're like, when you say fully subscribed, they haven't been like installed. They've just been like.
Correct.
Okay.
So the contracted means that they are in the process of construction right now or complete. The pipeline is the one where they are still going out and getting their design estimate and going through contracting with GMP. And so they're.
So what point, so you would want like, I'm just trying to like, when would it become public knowledge? It's like when if I sign a contract?
I think once they close out a project with GMP, then we'd be able to say this is a done project. They have received their full incentive. We have double checked all of their work.
And there's not that many of them for you to.
Not yet. A lot of, so Maddie, maybe you know off the top of your head, but like actually completed, done, finished all of their contracting.
Thirty.
Oh, 30?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I get a list of those or no? I'm just, I don't want to be cumbersome, but I just like know where they've been.
No, it's definitely part of the plan is to get those things, get finished projects up on the website.
This is your place where seniority has its biggest perks. Representative Pouch, and then Representative Lally, then Representative Keiser, and then Representative Burke.
Sure. I totally understand it takes time to do this, and I'm curious, if the timeline, like from somebody submitting a application and then getting it completed is longer than what you expected, or is it, or not? And about half of the contracted ones you thought are done. I think last year there were only a couple that were done. So is there sort of an estimate of like, assuming, what's in the pipeline, a percentage of them get done? Is it like a year out or is it longer than that? Just sort of the timing of all of this, because that will also say, hey, when will the money be used up?
I'm going to let Maddie speak to this mostly, but I will say that I would say that the program hasn't had enough time to reach that sort of like, okay, what's our stable state? Took about a year of pounding the pavement, getting applications in the door, and we had a huge rush at the beginning. We're still kind of working out some of our administrative flow and processes. And so it's a little tough to get sort of reliable, it's tough to predict reliable trends out of this because we still are kind of in a state of getting into normalcy. So we've been trying to do that, but I would caution that our projections are based on 2 years, one of which was massive ramp up, and we're just now kind of starting to see what normalcy looks like. However, I will say that that normalcy is interrupted because a lot of communities are seeing this message, right? There's no more funding left. So we're not seeing as much come through on that pre-application side anymore because they know the funding's not there. So just to say, it's really tough at this point to kind of estimate trends, but I'll let Maddie speak more to some of what we've seen in terms of how long it takes projects to get through.
Yeah, I think the part of the process that takes the most amount of time is the project development process, from application intake to then it might be like a resident and they have to get approval from their PUA and move forward with the project. And so up until the contracting stage, that can often take the most amount of time. Getting a design and a site visit from an electrician, selecting hardware, figuring out software costs and O&M costs of really like the equipment. There's a good amount of work on applicants' part up front, and then once a project is contracted, applicants have 12 months to get the chargers installed, and once they typically sign the agreement, they have their electrician scheduled, and that moves more quickly as long as it's not, middle of winter and no trenching is needed. So it's really the project development phase before getting under contract with charge for a month that can take longer and is really situational depending on who the applicant is and if they're a decision maker at that site or not. And hoops they need to jump through to get the chargers approved.
And sort of just a follow-up, it doesn't have to be at this moment, but there has been curiosity or questions about how much are level 1 and how much are level 2, going in the program. Not debating which one is the,
Oh, sure.
where they might be
Yeah.
worthwhile.
The majority of applicants are requesting funding for level 2 chargers. I think we have only one project that's under contract for level 1 ports. And again, the level 1 chargers and also very situational depending on available electrical infrastructure, employers where it's maybe shift work and cars are going to be parked for 9 to 10 hours at a time, or multi-unit residences where it's the grant funding can provide a pretty significant incentive towards the cost of civil construction and electrical and utility make-ready work. But sometimes depending on the setup, the parking just might be not near any electrical infrastructure at all. And so doing an outlet with one charger might be more beneficial, but we haven't seen much uptake in the level 1 option program.
Yeah, maybe just one more second. One more
Still your floor,
follow-up.
please. Thank you.
So we've heard a little bit of information about the idea of a right to charge where an HOA, organization can't say no, they don't have to pay for it, but they need to sort of allow this to move forward. Is that an issue at all that's come up where applicants have said, oh, we really want to do it, but maybe an HOA says, no, we're not doing it?
The program requires that if the applicant is not the property owner, they have to have property owner sign off. We talked about this a little bit when the right to charge legislation came up last year. I think it was S-271. And we talked about it a little bit in terms of our program. It's a little concerning because I think what our program would not want to see is we wouldn't want to see applicants having an application where the property owner only begrudgingly gave their permission, because there's just so much opportunity for the program for the project to go awry from there, and it would sort of tie up our money and not get it into the places where folks are actually ready to move forward with a project and they have, support from their, like, actual support from their property owner. So, I think that's our concern about that legislation in terms of our program. I think I said I wasn't going to speak from personal experience, but I'm a renter and I don't see the legislation being helpful for me. I can't imagine what we're seeing from projects is in order to install equipment, it's 17 to 20, sometimes up to $30,000. I'm not going to put that kind of investment, most of which I cannot take with me when I leave. So it's just, I don't think it's going to do as much for getting that access as we would like. I do think for condos, I think it's a bit different, right? Because those folks have an asset there. They can pass that cost on to the next owner, et cetera. And perhaps for smaller, our program does not cover single family and 2-unit. Our program for residential is 3+ units. So I think if that legislation could focus on the part of the market that we are not reaching with our incentive program, then probably might be a better fit. So,
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. We took testimony last week on some of the challenges related to geographical proximity of a project to transformers for phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 2 power levels. And I was just wondering if that is a factor in some of the what looks like sort of slower uptake in some of the more rural counties. And we also learned that, and I know this is a difficult question for you to answer because everything is in flux and what is shown here is not entirely representative of where things are. But I just was wondering if that was an issue that it just plays out. There's some geographic inequities. One of the things that we learned was that certain utilities will actually pick up the cost of a transformer upgrade. Others, that's on the dime of the applicant. And, just if you're able to speak to that, if you could speak to that.
I'm probably also going to pass this in a second to my GMP partners, but what I will say is that my guess is that for those locations where a transformer is an issue, we are probably not seeing those applicants. We probably wouldn't even know. If they are talking to the utility and they're being told that they need a transformer and it's 30, 40, our program is not going to cover that. Our program covers up to 20,000 of make ready.
Yeah.
But it's not going to cover a significant portion if they are also being required to do a transformer. So they're probably just not coming into our program at all. But I'll let GMP add to that.
I would say that's accurate. I can't say with 100% certainty that that's not part of the slower uptake in more rural areas, but I can say that we haven't had any projects that haven't moved forward because of transformer.
That you're aware of.
Yeah.
That you're aware of. Okay.
Chris Conner from the department. I have actually a happy story to tell from this regard. I live in Calais, so it's a rural utility. My utility is Washington Electric. And during the pandemic, there were no transformers to be had. And I wanted to get an EV, and they said, well, due to the size of your transformer, it's just not an option for you. And if you do it, we're going to charge you. You blow up our system. So I'm like, great. That's the incentive that I need. It was a very long conversation, and ultimately we got to a place where we were like, we'll do it. We found a transformer, but you need to pay. So I wanted to do this. So I did pay a portion of the cost of the transformer. Thankfully, I think the Public Service Board intervened and they wanted to see the utilities support beneficial electrification. So 3 months later, I got a note from the director of Washington Electric saying our policy has changed and I got a refund. So utilities are moving in the right direction, but based on where you are, there could be a different story to tell. How are we doing on time? I mean, I'm just concerned.
We're going to do a story.
Fine. We're fine. We have some flexibility in our morning.
All right. Were there other questions before I?
We're over to Representative Keiser.
Yeah, thanks.
Representative Burke's still in the queue. So you're in a popular topic.
This just has to do with the presentation. And what I see here is the numbers go from contracted and pipeline to total. Those are supposed to tick across. And they're also supposed to tick upward.
I hope so.
They don't.
Oh, good
In
Lord.
fact, I think
Okay.
the pipeline is off about $70,000 and the totals are off some $40,000.
Thank
And
you.
that's just so you, when your presentation is given, again, you might be more accurate.
I will, thank you very much for that. I will need to double check those numbers. Okay, sorry, there were other questions.
Representative Burke, I think.
Yeah, just quickly, and sort of apropos of what Representative Corcoran was asking, and I'm wondering is, once you, the public chargers, are they on the, the various apps, like that, you're looking for a charging station and, in a particular area and all the different ones will pop up. Are they part of that? Are they listed in that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
To be eligible for the public attraction part of the funding, those stations had to be made available to the general public. They have to be networked.
Uh-huh.
They have to be networked on what they call OCPP compliant, meaning that it's not tied, the equipment is not tied to one network. So for example, JuiceBox recently stopped operations in the US. And so that was problematic if they were not, it means that that station cannot be then transferred to another network. So we've put in requirements so that stations have to be networked, they have to be visible through the apps. And if that service provider decides to stop operating, the equipment can then be transferred to another network provider.
And just sort of an anecdote, our hospital put in a bunch of chargers and they are free for people during the day, go to the hospital, I work there, but you also, they allow residents of the town to use them at night, which is really nice.
I think that's a great way to really optimize the use of the equipment. Yeah.
We got all the way through.
Okay, great. So just more digging in, this is just looking at it from the county level. So again, the number of contracted projects by each county in the pipeline and the total. I will have to double check these numbers as well. I won't have time to do it before you do, I'm sure. But
Just trying to be helpful. I don't mean to criticize.
I very much appreciate it. I admit that I was pulling together these slides and then you were like in a feverish, literally feverish state. So, there definitely could be mistakes. So this is just to say that we are continuing to work with partners to help kind of drum up some more, again, multi-unit applications in these counties that have not reached that cap, trying to spend down the funds that we have in multi-unit in those counties that haven't met the cap. Until now. So in the last legislative session, Act 148 was passed. This authorized an additional 1.7 million towards these programs. We just finished signing an MOU with VTrans to receive those funds. And what these funds are going to allow us to do is sort of two things I want to point out. One, that 10% cap would have meant that some counties didn't receive as much investment, right? Because it was 10%, we have 14 counties. So the new funding will allow us to turn that cap into a floor and create some stability in those counties. Those counties are going to know that they can have available to them up to $486,000 for charging projects. So that message saying, sorry, no more workplace can come down. They will have that sort of certainty around we can get up to $486,000. The other thing it will allow us to do is that new money was for multi-unit or workplaces. So we will be able to open up the types of projects that we can continue taking applications for. So if there are workplaces, we actually have had workplaces in those counties, but we haven't been able to award them because we didn't have any more workplace funding available. This new 1.7 will help us do that. So we're using this 1.7 that was allocated from Act 148. This is from the fees plus some other funds from VTrans to create the funding floor. All counties will have available to them $486,000 to invest for EVSE infrastructure projects and open up workplace again to be eligible in those counties. Just another way of looking at this program, this is how we're going to make the funding floor work. So in order to make this funding floor happen, the total that we need is essentially 2.1 million. 1.9 of that is for the direct incentives to sort of reserve for each county. And then some portion for administration, continuing to work with GMP. We'll take that 1.7 from Act 148 and we'll hold that as a reserve. And then we'll use another roughly 500,000 from our original 10 million allocation to complete that sort of reserve. So our plan is to hold those funds to help those counties who have been a little slower to adopt, get some more multi-unit, some more workplace projects in the pipeline and move those along. We do anticipate that those counties will continue to be a little bit slower to move on EVSE infrastructure compared to the other counties that have, kind of gone very quickly up to their cap. And so right now we're estimating that we would hold these reserves for 3 years. We have 3 years to work with these counties to get projects into the pipeline and completed and use those funds. I think after the 3 years, then we would talk about if they haven't used that 486 that's available to them, we move that back into the program, the general program.
Representative Corcoran, yes.
Just a quick question. How does the EV registration fee, the roughly 1.4 million flow in to this 1.7? Or just your whole budget, it's a different parameters, same parameters. As far as awards and public attractions and all that. Just wonder how they meld together.
So essentially the program is just trying to make use of the funds that is made available. In the last legislative session, it was 1.7. Some of that was to be funded from the EV registration fees, but the EV registration fees did not fully cover that 1.7 that was authorized. So some of it just came from VTrans's budget. And that's the MOU that we have just signed. And so that's the pot of money that we are now trying to figure out how to make the best use of that through our program and meet some of the goals of the program.
I guess I was confused. 1.7 is a totally different pot of money that we came up with, right?
Yes.
And then you have the pot of money for the EV. So it's like, what, almost 3 million?
Change or not?
I guess I'm confused. If our phone a friend from the agency would like to speak to this.
Oh, yeah.
Well, like, that would be, because that's where I'm at, I guess, right? We got a provision in our bill for this year to make sure the agency transferred 1.4 million. This 1.7 is a separate, already pre-done from the previous years, 1.7. And so if you could clarify that for us, I would greatly appreciate it, Patrick.
So for the record, Patrick Murphy, agency transportation. So in last year's transportation bill, there was 1.7 that was carved out to go to ACCT for workplace charging, multi-unit dwelling charging. So in terms of how it lines up with their programs, it supports their programs and they can get this money out in a cost-effective way, but it doesn't quite line up because there's also the community attractions element that's included in the program. So that's one area where if you're looking to get more funding out to places like in the Northeast Kingdom more quickly, it might be worth re-looking at that so that it includes community attractions, because that can kind of open up more opportunities in the places where it's not going out as quickly. The 1.4 million is what's now being proposed as part of the FY26 budget. And that would come entirely from the EV infrastructure fee proceeds. The 1.7 earlier in FY25 is coming both from 1.1 million that was repurposed from the central branch fund, and then the 600,000 that was expected in the first 6 months of implementing the infrastructure. So it's only that 600,000 that's coming from the.
Yeah, no, like, I guess my point is, obviously, we made a policy decision to leave out like the third wheel. Public attractions, and like I said, should we revisit that policy from your perspective? Because we have more money now,
Right.
you know. That's what I was trying to make, thanks for making that clear.
Now, yeah, sorry, yes. So in the last legislative session, the legislation made it clear that the new funding could only be used for multi-unit workplaces. So correct, we still would be, we would not have any additional funding for any public attraction locations. I think, I mean, I don't think it would hurt to add it back in as an option, but I think we would still take some time internally. One of the things in the public attraction realm is, I think level 3 is truly a better use case, but level 3 eats up that money much more quickly. We, in our DC fast charge, maybe I'll just skip ahead. Maybe I'll just skip ahead and we'll hop around a bit. In our DC fast charge competitive program, we invited, again, the eligibility was that it had to be locations that were more than 10 miles from an existing DC fast charge that was installed. We had 30 pre-applications. So again, pretty low bar. Just tell us if you're interested. Are you further than 10 miles away? And are you interested in hosting, owning, operating a DC fast charge? From there, we double checked the eligibility, which is really just double checking that they were in fact more than 10 miles. From there, we invited 23 applicants to submit full applications. We received 12 full applications. Most of the ones that were invited but did not submit a full application, I will say, were municipalities. Maybe appropriately so, realizing that it's a big investment for a municipality to take on. From that 12, we made 9 awards. There were some applicants that, I don't know if I should say this on the record, but there were some applicants up in the Northeast Kingdom that, the Northeast Kingdom is definitely an area that could use more investment, but the applications just were not as strong. So I think if we had additional funds for public attraction, one of the ways that we would consider using it is to run another competitive grant round for DC fast charge, really trying to work, provide some technical assistance to get those property owners, whoever's interested in doing DC fast charge up in the Northeast Kingdom, to really pull together a stronger, more competitive application so that we can feel confident in funding those stations. So that's kind of off the cuff. I think one of the things we talked about programmatically as well is that in the public attraction space, level 2 is a little tricky because it's really meant for a longer dwell time. And so unless that level 2 is truly in a very downtown location, you can walk to other businesses, people can do other things. It really becomes more of a business asset than it is a public asset. So I don't think it would hurt to make the funding available to public attractions again, and then, trust us to
Right.
figure out the best way to fund that public attractions funds.
Representative White?
To clarify that the public attractions funding, I mean, we're talking about level 3?
It was level 2 and 3 was enabled. Actually, level 1 was also enabled in the original legislation, and we decided level 1 is not a good fit for public attraction.
Yeah.
But level 2 and level 3 was eligible. We just reserved most of the funds for that DC fast charge. There were 360,000 was available for that level 2 public attraction. So we did see a lot of applications that didn't get funded, a lot of applications for level 2 public attraction that didn't get funded just because we had reserved very little funds for that section.
I mean, just in terms of, I was happy to hear that you had used very few funds for level 1 charging. So I'm an EV driver. I've benefited from Green Mountain Power's level 2 charger at my home. It's great. But a level 1 charger, I question, what the value is, because it takes so long to charge, like days. And when we look at Vermont's needs overall, I know we had this big program which has been halted that was federally funded for level threes, but I mean, it really feels like we have significant need for level threes more than anything else in the state. And these are comments, but my question is Drive Electric Vermont, is that the best website to be looking at our charging infrastructure in Vermont?
Oh, best website. Drive Electric Vermont is a fantastic resource, and they definitely link to a lot of other resources. In terms like the best one place to find public infrastructure. I mean, my go-to is the alternative fuels corridor charging map, which is it's a federal DOE map for where there is public alternative fueling infrastructure. I don't know. Does anybody else have favorites?
It just seems like there's a need, like, I'm not sure, yeah, I mean, there's so many different apps for charge points
There
and
are.
this and that, but just when you look at Drive Electric Vermont to see where are the chargers near me, it's pretty difficult to figure out where they are.
Yeah, well, and Drive Vermont would be pulling from other app APIs to find those locations, so.
But what was the name of the website you said?
It's the alternative fuels corridor charging map, right? Alternative,
The fuel standard.
the center.
Thank you.
I think our Representative Burke and then Representative Couch and Representative Lally are all in the queue.
Just a clarification, when you say fast charger, are you meaning level 2 or level 3? Or what are you meaning just level 3?
Level 3.
As part of the program, I can speak about Heinsberg. We looked at one of these grants and then there was, I think, within the town hall, who's gonna manage it? And, maybe somebody goes there and, charges every night, they walk over and they use it every night. So are there guidelines on, the usage and like for an HOA? I mean, I imagine they go, well, we can put 4 in, we got 48 units. Who gets to use them? Are there guidelines like that or expectations or just sort of help in the process of how you go about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Much of it is informed from DHGD's previous multi-unit pilot for level 2 charging, as well as a number of other resources that exist that Drive Electric Vermont also helps support with project development and kind of figuring out, okay, based on the lay of the land at a site, how many chargers is going to work for the number of residents. There aren't specific programmatic requirements beyond a maximum number of ports that can be awarded per site, depending on the number of residents or employees at a multi-unit residence or workplace. But to my point earlier about the project development phase taking the longest in terms of the full length of the project, it's to exactly that point, figuring out the best use case management over the life of the equipment, things like that. So yes, we do a lot of work with applicants on figuring out what's going to happen once the chargers are installed and up and running, and how to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if it happens, but I could see, you live at a condo, HOA, and, I arrive early from work, and so I plug in. And then, now people are waiting till 11 o'clock at night. I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like that's a piece that as you move the program forward, you look at, hey, how's it going?
Yep.
What are some of the problems? So we sort of learn as we go.
Yeah. There's a lot of great sort of national guidance on best practices for managing equipment. And especially if you have networked equipment, there's a lot of sort of technological support for encouraging turnover of the equipment, using a reservation system, et cetera. I will say Drive Electric Vermont also is really useful in this space. They have come up with a couple of guidance documents at the request of some of our grantees, property owner, multi-unit affordable property owners who are like, yeah, but now we need some support on how to keep this thing going. And so part of our scope with DEV is analyzing that use data. That use data will tell us a lot about how a property owner in Vermont might need to think about managing their equipment. And so just, I guess, another shout out to DEV that's where they really kind of come in and shine, is being able to follow in with some of this program support, and not just from our grant programs, but from what they know of what's happening in other equipment, other parts of the network that have not been funded by us necessarily.
So,
Yeah, I was just wondering, among what are considered public attractions? And then the other part of my question is a Main Street within an RPC map designated area considered a public attraction or something that could become a public attraction? I'm personally very interested in the prospect of using designated areas, particularly those with access to phase 3 power, as like just sort of, to me, completely obvious locations. You know, they have stores, they have walking and biking infrastructure, they're supported by transit for some of these locations, and really make these places more habitable, livable, and prosperous and productive at the same time, because we need the grand list revenue given the uncertainty in Washington. So it seems like a way to, check off a bunch of boxes at once. So just wondering how that factors in, and then geographically, what are the opportunities and constraints that you're facing? Because not every place is Chittenden or, Brattleboro.
Yeah. I don't know, Maddie, if you remember off the top of your head the exact definition we used for public attraction, but it was essentially looking for places where there are things for a person to do for at least, I want to say like an hour or two. So there's something for people to do for at least an hour and a half, and it's available to the general public. And I think this is where, the level, maybe there needs to be a slightly different definition for level 2 than it is for level 3. What I will say is, well, maybe depending on our designation reform, but any of our downtown areas and our village areas, yes, those are public attractions. We were just talking about Starksboro and the case study that you have, Starksboro. It's a pretty rural town, but they did put an EVSE and they put it in the most happening spot. It's not the most happening spot in Vermont, but for Starksboro, it's the most happening spot. So it provides amenities. There's, the bus comes through there. There's toilets. There's a community pavilion. The municipal offices are there. The school's right down the street. So yes, the public attractions would be, we would be really looking for those places where there's a lot going on. I would say the exception again is when we are looking for the DC fast charge, trying to get it out into those places that are more remote. Well, they are more remote, so there's less happening there, but they still need DC fast charging.
And I appreciate, happening is a very local thing in Vermont.
That's true.
It's very scalable, and yeah.
Okay, I'm coming close on time. So I think one other thing I wanted to highlight. So most of what we talked about are the projects that are in contract, in pipeline. We are holding funding for them. We are planning on those projects moving forward. I just wanted to make note that that is not all GMP has been managing. We've had over 500 applications total, and part of GMP's job in administering this is also managing those applications that are not moving forward. They still are getting screened for their eligibility, and they're being communicated to if we don't think we have funds available for them. And so this is just a chart of all of the applications that we have closed out and the reason we have closed them out. Quite a few were closed out because our funding was oversubscribed. We didn't have enough workplace funding for the application or public attraction, or the county itself that the application was in was already oversubscribed. So I guess the last thing I'll say, and then we can take more questions, is I think the program, we had a large amount of money to start with, and we were able as a program to kind of span the two worlds that I think we kind of know exist in Vermont. We were able to move very quickly with a lot of funds, and those counties that were ready to move quick, we were able to move them very quickly, and they reached that cap very quick. But we are also wanting to work in those counties that are going to be a little bit slower to maybe take up some of this technology and make use of these funds. So I think the program, because we had so much money to begin with, over the past 2 years, we've kind of been able to straddle those two sort of programmatic landscapes. I think at this point, we're in a place where we see that there is a value, and we want to be able to work in these counties that might be a little bit slower to take this up. But it also means that we're not sort of leveraging the capacity that we've built in this program. We are able to roughly process from start to finish 80 projects a year. But because the funds that we have coming in are going to be reserved for those counties that are going to move a little bit slower, we're anticipating that we're probably only going to be processing roughly 30 projects per year moving forward. So it's just to say, we're still in this kind of growing phase. A lot of funding to begin with, then not a lot of funding. So we haven't really kind of reached a stable place for the program just yet. And I think that's it for me.
Anybody else have any questions or concerns or anything else in the team you want to add?
I just have one question, I think maybe for a more GMT question. In Chittenden County is, I'm understanding that there is not funding anymore available for projects in that area. Are builders of new housing just doing this anyway because it's like makes sense to do? Or do they require a subsidy, or are people just doing it? In my community, we which includes Route 7 North, we have a lot of housing that we're building there, and there's three-phase power there. So it would, I'm just kind of wondering, how is this just becoming normative to do this?
That's a great question. I can't speak to all builders in the Chittenden County area. I do know of some like one-off projects or maybe not developers, but single-family builders where clients are interested in fully electric homes, having EV chargers put in at the time of new construction. It's a great time to do it, to run that electrical infrastructure. The project that I can speak to, Green Mountain Powers works with the O'Brien brothers. We have a resilient neighborhood pilot in South Burlington where all of the new homes built in that community do have a level 2 charger. And O'Brien brothers are also working on putting in a DC fast charger into the sort of public aspect of their planned community there. So I do think it's happening, but I can't say it's anymore yet.
There are minimum requirements too for new construction. If it's if it's a multi-unit that falls within the commercial code, there's the commercial energy building code. And so they are required to put in a certain amount and number depending on the number of parking spaces.
Okay.
So that new construction is being covered very well. I would also say for new construction in single family, single family new construction probably has the panel capacity there. And so the cost of adding a charger after construction is not a huge barrier. It's really in those larger projects where trenching and doing all that work after you've already done construction is really tough.
But that is captured, you're saying, if they fall under, they're regulated by the commercial building code.
Correct.
Okay.
Then they will have some percentage of spaces that are either make ready. So the trenching is already there and they would just need to install the equipment. And I think in some cases they actually have to have an actual physical charger, depending on the number of spaces.
Okay, that's great.
Also, just a really fun story. One of our grantees from our multi-unit dwelling pilot program, after we had closed out that project, she contacted us and let us know that some of the other developments, the affordable housing developments that they were working on, they were continuing to include EV charging equipment in the project. And she was just highlighting that all of her learning from the grant program, they were able to make it, the finances work from their existing projects. So it was just a really great, the learning was continued on into other projects, and those projects will now have EVSE too.
That's great.
Anybody else? Thank you all very much for coming and
Thank you.
this morning and sharing. And we're gonna break and come back at 10:30 instead of our 10 to 10:15. It'll be 10:15 to 10:30. Then we'll start back up.